County, Ms. Inman.
Here.
Powhatan County, Mr. Webb.
Here.
City of Richmond, Mr. Wagner.
Here.
Mr. Baynow.
Very good.
Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. CBTA, Mr. Parsons. Ms. Nyamweya. DRPT, Mr. Hudson.
Here.
Ms. Dubinsky. GRTC, Ms. Robinson.
Here.
Mr. Robinson.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Simmons. Ride Finders, Mr. O'Keefe. VDOT, Ms. Sidemock.
Here.
Mr. Scheid. Okay, that concludes roll call. And we do have a quorum.
Okay.
Yes, Chair Adams, I just caught you. Thank you so much. So I'll turn it back to y'all. We're good to go.
Thank you, Sarah Keel. Okay, sorry for the delay with the ICG meeting, everyone, but we'll go ahead and welcome and introduce everybody. We do have a quorum, so we'll move on to see if there's any consideration for amendments to the agenda. Does anyone have any recommendations for an amendment to the agenda? Are we good? All right, very well then. We'll go ahead and open the public comment period. If you have anyone signed up to speak.
We don't have anyone signed up to speak, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Miles. And we'll go ahead and move on to the consent agenda, item number 5, the approval of the April 14th meeting minutes. Were there any changes, comments, suggestions, or a motion to approve?
Madam Chair, if I can point out, the consent agenda has 2 items on it. There's also an existing
Yep.
project tip amendment, which is updating an existing project that's already in the tip.
Right, thank you, Miles. So we'll, anyone have any comments on either one of the consent agenda items?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Naomi.
Sharon Smidler, second.
Thank you, Sharon. So that also includes, Miles, the tip amendment for the
That's
existing
correct.
projects? Yep, okay, so we'll go ahead and do a voice vote or a roll call.
Voice vote is fine.
I think we can do voice. So all those in approve of the 2 consent agenda items, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, so very good. We'll go ahead and so I'll just give a little TAC chair report that we just came off the ICG meeting and we did approve the membership, the schedule, and the project list. So for those of you who are not part of the ICG, that there was a approved and that's all I have to report. Moving on to item number 7, the 2050 long-range transportation plan in the fiscal year 27 through 30 TIP regional conformity assessment. That's on page 18 of our meeting packet. We'll get a little presentation from Dorian Allen on that. And this is an action item that we'll need to look at. Good morning, Dorian.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you to the TAG members. Today, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome, great. Today, I'll be discussing the 2050 LRTP FY27 FY30 TIP regional conformity assessment. So this process is a part of our overall transportation planning process where we identify issues and solutions, prioritize the solutions, fund projects, authorize projects, implement projects, and then evaluate the outcomes. Here, we want to make sure that our regionally significant projects are meeting the air quality standards as regulated by the federal government. So Section 176 of the Clean Air Act requires that any federally funded highway or transit project must be consistent with the purpose of the state implementation plan, which is to achieve, maintain, and enforce national ambient air quality standards, or NAAQS. So basically, this means that any new projects, short-term or long-term, will not cause or contribute to any new air quality violations, worsen existing violations, or delay timely attainment of the relevant NAAQS requirements. So we basically saw this material before, but just a recent history of the air quality conformity for the region. The Richmond region previously did not meet the national 1997 8-hour ozone standard, which basically meant that sources like factories, power plants, and vehicles created excessive ozone pollution, leading to unhealthy air. We did get back into that attainment designation back in 2008, and even maintained those standards during stricter regulations in 2015. So despite the EPA lowering the threshold against the 2015, again in 2015, the Richmond region was once again designated as attained or unclassifiable in 2018. So we just had the interagency coordination group meeting. This is typically held when the region is updating the TIP or the LRTP. The 2050 LRTP consensus scenario was approved by the policy board April 23rd, and we are currently in the development of the FY27, FY30 Transportation Improvement Program. So the TAC has been authorized to review the draft conformity report and approve it for public review. The public review will be held from May 15th to June 14th. So the requested action for the day, the Technical Advisory Committee should review the draft regional conformity assessment and authorize staff to open a 30-day public comment period from May 15th, 2026 to June 14th, 2026.
Thank you, Dorian. Any questions or comments on the presentation by Dorian? If not, I'll entertain a motion. We're approving the draft.
I'd like to make a motion to open up the conformity assessment for public comment.
Oh, yes, Naomi, thank you. Do we have any comments?
Sharon Smidler, second.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? Very well. We'll get that on the schedule, Dorian. Thank you so much
Thank you, Madam Chair.
for the public comment review. All right, so moving on to item number 8 is the 24 through 27 fiscal year Transportation Improvement Program Amendment. It's a VDOT request for item number ITTF 23, which is the 288 northbound hard shoulder running. Roadway UPC number is the T31811. This is on page 20 of our meeting packet. And we'll get a presentation from Will Heller so that we can take action on this item.
All right. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So today I'm bringing you all a TIP amendment requested by VDOT. So the goal of this VDOT amendment is to take the scope of work for the existing VA 288 northbound hard shoulder running lane project and then split it between 2 different UPCs. So we'll have the original UPC, which is UPC 122147, which will remain in the TIP and it will hold the funding for the project technology improvements. And then we're going to have the new UPC, which is UPC T31811, which is going to be created to house the funding for the project's roadway improvements. So yes, there's the second one. So to remind everybody just about the goal of the project itself, it is creating a hard shoulder that can be used as a running lane during peak travel times to ease congestion between Huguenot Trail and Patterson Avenue. It will involve pavement improvements as well as installation of intelligent transportation systems that will help to signal when the shoulder is being used as a running lane. And then to reiterate, the TIP amendment requested from VDOT will split the existing project between the original UPC and a new UPC, with the new UPC housing funding for roadway improvements and the original housing funding for technology improvements. So here's the TIP block that we have from VDOT for the new UPC. And our request today is that the TAC recommends approval of the proposed TIP amendment. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Will. Any additional comments regarding the project split? All right, is anyone like to make a motion on approving this?
This is also Richland. I'll make a, oh, sorry. I'd like to make the motion since the project does reside in Houston County.
Thank you, Austin. Can we get a second?
This is JJ. I'll second.
Thank you, JJ. We'll go ahead and do a voice vote then. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Very well. Thank you so much. All right, moving on to item number 9, which is the Flexible Regional Spending Western BRT Extension Project. We'll get a presentation from Mr. Miles Bushing, and this is on page 24 of our meeting packet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. This item is a follow-up to the discussion that we had last month. As you'll recall, at the April meeting, we discussed the new projects and the rankings for the flexible regional funding, which is what we're calling the STBG, CMAQ, and carbon funding programs. And the next project that was on the list was the Western Pulse Extension. We didn't have enough money to fully fund that request, but there was discussion at the meeting about potentially partially funding it. And the request was that we bring it back with more information about the overall status of that project, and then kind of have another opportunity to discuss whether partial funding is appropriate. So in your agenda packets, you'll have the more detailed overview that GRTC provided, but just to remind everyone, at the high level, this project was a $16.9 million request. This is supporting the Western Pulse Extension, which is basically taking it from Willow Lawn out to Parham. And this application that came through for the RSTP CMAQ program was specifically oriented around the signal priority component of that project. Depending on timing, it could be a standalone project or it could all be bundled together. But as I mentioned before, it was the next highest ranked project. We just didn't have enough funding to fully fund that request. So from the information that GRTC had provided, and I think this was part of the discussion that we were really focusing on last time, the overall project is $67.3 million, with funding secured for $44.6 million of that. So there's a remaining balance of $22.6 million to fully fund that Western extension. Obviously at 16.9, this request would cover a significant portion of that. But as I mentioned, the problem is we don't have enough funding for 16.9. We presented this last time, and these numbers are slightly different from what's in your agenda packet. On Friday, we received the final budget numbers for this upcoming fiscal year, which had a slight reduction overall. I think it was about $80,000. So this is reflective of that sort of latest, greatest information that we've just received. But on the whole, after taking out funding for the projects we'd already committed to, meeting our balance entry targets, and then addressing those requests that we had for existing projects, and then the new projects that were selected higher up on the list, we have just under $9 million available across the 3 funding programs that we're looking at. And then I wanted to flag, we have a potential cancellation here that will free up $4 million in CMAQ as well. So the Ride Finders project, which was an expansion to include transit incentives, has been working its way through the process. I think you all know we've processed a TIP amendment a couple months ago. We just were looking at a second round of funding. But in reviews with Ride Finders, GRTC, and DRPT, the scope is challenging in terms of eligibility for federal funds. Really at the core, the incentive program doesn't really work well without having a base fare to incentivize. And so because of that messiness, the request from Ride Finders has been to go ahead and cancel that project, and that would free up the $4 million that are available. And they did ask that we consider whether that would be eligible and potentially useful for this specific request that was coming before the TAC. So if we were to include that $4 million as well, that would bring the total to just under $13 million that are available out of that $16.9 million request. Now, in our funding framework, partial awards are generally only allowed for leveraging, which is limited to PE or whatever the first phase of the project is. And as you all are very familiar with, those leveraging applications are limited time. So you get a couple rounds of smart scale or whatever funding program you're seeking, and the funds would get rescinded if you're not successful. However, this is a funding framework. TAC can always recommend a deviation from that framework. I think we've had discussions about this in previous rounds. I know we've had it at the CVTA as well. So that is something that the TAC can recommend. So the requested action today is for TAC to discuss and review this request again and make a recommendation on whether to award partial funding for the Western Extension. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Miles. So is there further discussion on this? Other members?
No, this is Sharon with Rrtpo. I just wanted to, thank, Plan RVA for letting us present again and for tax consideration. And for Adrian and GRTC providing the additional information. I think they're asking for 12.9 million, including the 4 million cancellation for the Pulse Western Extension. And we'd like to request an exception from the policy for just leveraging, since we already have 45 million in funding towards the project. And we have a smart scale application, pre-application in that DRPT has preliminarily reviewed, and they expect it to go to full application. So if we were granted this 12.9 million approximately through STBG CMAQ, then our ask would be from smart scale the difference. Gosh, I'm going to do math of that. So it makes it around 10 million, but it makes it more competitive. And I think, I wouldn't always want to grant an exception from the leveraging, but I think this is a good case for supporting multimodal improvements. I know I heard the director of DRPT speak at the 6-year improvement plan program meeting last night about the Pulse Western Extension and all the funding that has been earned in support of multimodal improvements in the Richmond region. And I think this is a great project. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them along with others on the call.
Yes, so I see Amy Inman has her hand up. You have some comments, Amy?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Miles and Sharon. I know I probably had most of the questions at the last meeting, so I just want to thank you for bringing this back and for clarifying some of the aspects of this project and how it was the next to be funded. So if you'd like, I'd like to make the recommendation that we go ahead and amend our framework to allow for this funding to be allocated to this project. Is it $13 million, whatever the total amount was, to advance the Western Extension Pulse project.
Thank you, Amy.
This is Daniel. I'm happy to second that. If Ms. Inman, are you hoping that to be a motion? Happy to second.
I was trying to make a motion. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, yeah, I got you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep, so we have a motion from Amy and a second from Daniel. Any further discussion, or are we ready to do a voice vote? Chet, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, is it amending the framework? Was that the motion? And is
No,
that the
it
proper
wasn't.
action?
It wasn't to amend it.
Exception.
I
Yeah,
think it was, yeah.
Yeah, I think
We
it
have an
would be
exception.
the motion should be to allocate 12.9 million and make an exception to the existing framework.
Thank you for clarifying.
That was it. Yes, thank you.
And I would like to second that clarified motion.
Thank you. So we understand what the motion is. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Thank you. That motion carries. Very good project. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 10, our draft regional safety plan. We'll get a informational presentation from Mr. Bushing on that.
Yes, thank you again, Madam Chair. This item is really quick. It's really more of a reminder that we are seeking input right now on the draft regional safety plan. So just as a reminder, the draft plan's out for review, and we have gone through, as you see, this whole phase of development so far. We're at the draft plan. We're taking it back to you all for input before we finalize things and try and bring it back to you for a final review and recommendation. What does the plan do? The main thing, it maps out our higher injury network, which basically shows us that 1% of our regional roadways account for 70% of our fatal and serious injury crashes. Again, this is 5 years worth of data. We took a little bit of a different approach than we used last time. So we used kind of sliding windows to try and put together segments that are together and are next to each other to find kind of the longest length of roadway where we're still getting into that high injury network. But this is kind of the empirical foundation. This is the data that drives everything else that comes through the plan. From that, we built up to priority safety corridors. So this was essentially connecting those various high injury network segments into corridors, which we could then focus on for future studies. And this also takes into account some other components like community identified concerns and some hotspot data. And then this would basically be the basis for future safety studies in coordination with obviously the localities and VDOT to pick the kind of the exact limits. And then there's 6 draft actions, which I think Dan went over last meeting, so I don't want to reiterate all of them, but this is the bulk of what we're really hoping for a lot of feedback on at this time. So these 6 actions sort of lay out the foundation, coming up with design manuals a little bit, I think, stronger than the language really is, but it's basically a guide to, if you're in this sort of type area with these sorts of elements, here are the best practices for safety design. It's building on our Complete Streets toolkit that we worked together on a while back. Looking at the RSA program that I've hit on, Quick Build library of resources, and then implementing Quick Build, working with you all on your own safety plans, and then tracking changes and kind of data and following through on the implementation. The big thing, the plan is out for review until May 22nd. So we're hoping to get any comments from you by the 22nd. Again, really focusing on the priority corridors within your locality and then the draft list of actions and the sort of individual tasks under each of them. And our goal would be to try and wrap up the draft plan by June 1st so we could bring it back to you at the next meeting for consideration. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Dan is out today, but obviously if you have anything, you can also reach out to him and he'll get back to you when he's in.
Thank you, Miles. So we have someone's hand up here. Who we got? JB.
That's me, Madam Chair, Joe Vidunas.
Joe.
Yes, so yeah, real quick, Miles, back to the slide that showed the 1%, 70%. Does that include interstate corridors?
It does not. So we excluded all the interstates from the initial analysis.
Got it.
And Madam Chair, I don't need any action. This was just a friendly reminder.
Yeah, I did have a question too, Miles. Do you know if this data that you have currently that's out for review includes the most recent data from our 106 study?
I'm not sure exactly the years that the crashes were pulled for that one. I'd have to go back and double check.
2020 to 24. Okay, yeah, so I'll follow back around with you on some comments on that during the review period. Thank you. All right, anyone else?
Miles, I was just gonna say, if you have any stuff you already prepared for social media or anything like that, if you want to send anything like that my way, I can ask our communications team at VDOT if they can share it as well.
Yes, I will take a look at those. And just for everyone's reminder, the engage.planrva.org always has any of our active engagements. So if there's anything open, any media kits, anything would be available there. So we always have it, but I don't know if there's anything open right this second for public review action.
Thanks for offering that, Naomi. The more ways we communicate information, the better. So that's great. Okay, then, so we'll, with that presentation being out there for review, we'll move on to item number 11, the fiscal year 28 Regional Public Transportation Plan. GRTC will give us some information on that, and hopefully everybody's been able to share their cameras and mics now for that.
Mine is up. Michelle, are you here? Perhaps?
Who's going to be sharing their screen?
Michelle was going to share her screen.
Okay, so Michelle needs some help being unmuted and getting her access to her camera.
She's still waiting in the.
Okay, now I have camera and I have a microphone.
All right, good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. Okay, I will share my screen if it's the right time for that.
Think so.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give the first part of this presentation and then Scudder will give the second half, but I will keep operating the slides.
Right.
Okay, do you all see the right purple opening slide?
We've got your screen open. Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll introduce myself, and I'm Michelle Poiro. I'm a principal with Jarrett Walker and Associates, and Scudder Wag is the CEO of Jarrett Walker and Associates. He'll present second, and we are leading the work for the Regional Public Transportation Plan, the update for fiscal year 2028. And I think this is maybe our third presentation to the TAC, but this will be the most substantial one. We've also had smaller conversations with each of the jurisdictions who is present in this meeting to talk in a more focused way about what's happening in each jurisdiction and the way that that will be relevant to this updated regional plan. So I'm going to talk about the types of analysis we've been doing to understand transportation demand and understand transit service in the region today. That is all leading up to a network design retreat that's happening at the start of June, which everyone here should have been invited to by now. If you haven't been invited, please let us know and we'll make sure to get you involved. So we're doing analysis to prepare for that network design retreat. Scudder will be facilitating it on June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And then Scudder will be talking in the second half of this presentation about the financial side of that and what the future financial picture is and how that informs what will go into this plan. So in terms of, oh, I forgot, we're going to review the timeline. So here we are in the spring. Wait, I'm sorry. Scudder, what am I looking at? Oh, this is just something that Adrian talked to you about in the last meeting, sorry, which is that FY 2027 regional plan is underway, but it's just a minimal maintenance of effort kind of update. So what we're talking about right now is a more substantial FY 2028 update that will really change the level of funding planned for, change the level of service planned for. And then what we're doing right now in the spring is analyzing existing transit services and updating financials. This summer, we're developing future transit scenarios, which is in that design retreat I already mentioned. There will also be public consultation on those transit scenarios this summer. And then in the fall, we're going to work with Plan RVA and GRTC and help them select and refine one scenario that goes into the future plan. In the winter, the phasing of that plan will be developed. So what happens when? And then in the spring of next year, this will be complete. Fiscal year 2028, regional transit plan should be complete. And so it would be coming back to you in a spring meeting next year. So the analysis we've been doing so far, this is a very simplified map of the region. So when I say regional, this is what we mean by the region. And we have the black lines on this map are the existing fixed route services operated by GRTC, and the purple zones on this map are the existing microtransit zones, on-demand zones. So those are the services that exist today that we've been studying. And this is a zoomed in look at the center of the fixed route network. The colors on this map stand for frequency, and this is something that will be true of all of our maps. Red routes are the most frequent, coming every 10 or 15 minutes. Blue routes are coming approximately every 30 minutes. Green routes are coming every 45 to 60 minutes. And then we have some yellow routes on here, which are expresses that come more sporadically. And again, you can see the purple zones are the demand response zones. And here we are quite zoomed in so we can see the center of the region, the center of the network. We're also looking at service over time, not just where it is, but when does it exist? So this is a table, this is an example of how we show people when service exists. So this whole column is service on a weekday, and each row is a route. And then the colors in each box show the frequency that's offered at that time of day. So on weekdays from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., the Route 1 offers a good frequency every 15 minutes, and so it has those red boxes going across its row. And so this is a big reference that helps people understand not just is there a route near me, but how frequently does my route come? How frequently would my future route come? And over how many hours of the day? And what about on Saturdays? And what about on Sundays? It's also a way that we can see at a glance the existence of the frequent network. High frequency transit service tends to be correlated with higher ridership because people find it so convenient. It's always ready to go when they're ready to go. But the red squares on this chart represent high frequency service, and you can see there's only a few frequent routes on weekdays, fewer on Saturdays, and none on Sundays. So the frequent network doesn't really exist all week long. This is a map that shows ridership. So I've been talking about service, but now we're also analyzing ridership. How much are people using service and where and when? This map shows the boardings at each bus stop across the existing transit system. We're a bit zoomed in here on the central counties and Richmond. The bigger the brown dot, the more people got on a bus stop there. And of course, we don't just look at it by bus stop, we're also looking at ridership by route, by day, and by time of day. We're also looking at ridership in microtransit zones. So this is an example. This is from this is the Ashland zone. And here, because there's not a bus stop, people can request a ride from wherever they are in the zone. The dots are a little bit less distinct, and sometimes they're more of a cloud or a blob. But the darker the red color here, the more people requested a ride from that spot or to that spot. And this is from January 2026, so it's pretty recent. And by looking at microtransit zones this way, one thing it helps us understand is there potential for a new or an extended fixed route bus route in this area. If microtransit is getting a lot of use, and it's getting a lot of use in places that could be connected efficiently by a fixed route, then that's worth considering. That's something that we will be considering. This is another zone. This is the Powhatan zone, and it's relatively new. So that's one reason it has lower ridership than the Azalea zone I just showed, but it's also a much less dense place than Azalea. So naturally it will have fewer requests for rides. But again, we can see where the rides are spatially and how many people are requesting rides from each area. The other thing we're doing with ridership information is comparing it to how much service is provided. Now, this is a pretty complicated chart, so I'll explain it one piece at a time. Each of the dots on this chart is a route or a service. So like, for example, in the upper left, we see the Pulse, and then less upper left, we see Route 1. So each dot is a route or a service. And we've plotted that dot on this chart according to its frequency at midday on weekdays, and that's on the horizontal axis. So the more frequent routes are plotted to the left, and the less frequent routes with the worst frequency are plotted to the right. And then vertically, we've plotted each of these dots according to not just how much ridership it gets, but how much ridership it gets relative to the amount of service on it. That's the number of boardings per service hour, the number of boardings per vehicle per hour. That's kind of a measure of efficiency. It's called productivity in the transit industry. So each dot is a route. The further left, the better the frequency that's being offered, and the further up, the more efficient it is in terms of ridership relative to service. And what we see in total is actually a pretty healthy general pattern, which is that the more frequent routes tend to have higher ridership and higher efficiency. And that's normal in a transit system when you have fit the level of service you're offering to the amount of demand in that area. So you offer more service, better frequency in areas with more people and more travel demand, and where transit is more efficient, and you get higher ridership relative to your service. And that's generally the pattern we see in the GRTC system today, which is good. But this chart is also useful and interesting when you're planning any changes to a network, because you can notice the outliers and ask some questions about them and consider whether a change would be helpful. So we'll be looking at the routes individually on this chart as well. We also see the demand response services, the microtransit services. Those are in the lower right. They don't have a frequency, so they don't really get to be put anywhere on this graph, so we put them off to the right. But they also have quite low productivity, quite low efficiency in terms of ridership per vehicle per hour. And that's just natural for microtransit. Microtransit has a ceiling of around 4 or 5 boardings per vehicle per hour that it can't really go above, because the more demand you have on it, you just have to put out another vehicle. And so that's also a normal place for microtransit to be in terms of this measure of productivity. Should I pause for any questions on this technical material before I keep going? Madam Chair?
I think you're doing great, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay, I'll keep going. So the other thing I want to show you is some maps showing the spatial analysis we've been doing. For example, how many people are located where, and how many jobs are located where in the region? And there's a couple different ways that we can look at that. One is just census data. This is America Community Survey census data from 2023. And brighter and redder places are dense with a mix of uses. Bluer places are dense with residents. Yellow places are dense with jobs. And we have an online version of this map that lets us zoom in much closer and see each community more specifically. We're also looking at movements, not just where people live or work, but where are people going? And we're getting that data from something called Rrtpo, which anonymizes and combines cell phone movements with other types of data to figure out where are people going and why. And this map shows the density of destinations. So any kind of destination, could be work, could be school, could be the bar, could be shopping, grocery store, doctor's office. And so this will help us see where are people going, and what kind of intensity are people going there. Therefore, maybe it's a good, has good potential for transit ridership. We're also going to look at that same type of data, the flow of people's trips based on cell phone movements, but we're going to look at it not just where are people going, but where are they going between. So from here to there. This is a map that shows trip flows, and this is for all types of trips. This is transit and driving, any mode. It's also for work trips, shopping trips, any kind of trip between different parts of the region. Now, this is a pretty crude map. It has these big zones because it's kind of impossible to show a map like this in a meeting like this. If you make the zones really small, it becomes an absolute bird's nest of lines. But we are also going to have a version of this map that allows us again to zoom in and look a little more closely and look at trips between different zones. And one thing we noticed as soon as we looked at this is just how much travel there is, for example, within Henrico County and between Richmond and Henrico County. That's that network of yellow lines showing very high volumes of travel over fairly short distances between those areas. Chesterfield County also is visible as having a lot of internal travel, that nest of orange lines in Chesterfield, where people are making many kinds of trips for many reasons. So again, this is from cell phone data, and this is from 2025, so it's more recent than census, which is beneficial. Finally, we are looking also at travel by time of day, not just where people are going, but when. So this graph shows, again, cell phone-based data, again from 2025, and it has two lines on it. The blue line is travel by the hour of the day on a weekday. And you can see that blue line peaks a little bit around 7 and 8 a.m. It doesn't fall very much. It keeps then growing a bit through the midday and then has an even higher peak in the afternoon around 3 and 4 and 5 p.m. And that's a pretty normal pattern for weekdays. People are going to work or school, or they're taking other people to school in the morning. And then in the afternoon, not only are many people going home from school or picking people up from school or going home from work, they're also running errands or, doing something fun in the afternoon, going to the gym. So that blue line is a pretty typical weekday pattern. And then the red line is weekends. And one thing that Scudder and I immediately noticed here is that, wow, the total amount of travel happening on weekends at midday is actually quite high. It's barely lower than the peak of travel on a weekday. And it's certainly higher in the midday than in the midday on the weekday. So there's a lot of weekend travel happening in this region. And again, this is all modes, all kinds of trips. This is not just transit. This is all types of trips. So we'll be looking at time of day, because an important question for any future plan is not just should there be service in more places, but should there be service at more times? And should there be better service at more times of day and more days of the week? That would be another question to address in this plan. So that's the technical analysis I wanted to brief you on, and then Scudder, actually I'm going to skip these two because I'm running a little late. Scudder is going to talk through some financial issues and projections.
Thanks, Michelle. So the baseline financials are going to give us insight into how much service can we plan for. Yeah, you can keep going. How much service can we plan for in this this process? This is a fiscal year 28 plan, so we're planning for next fiscal year and potentially up to 5 years beyond that. We are in the process of updating the financial projections that we have worked on in the past with GRTC. We did a set of financial projections that I'm going to share with you now that were based on last year's FY26 budget. Michelle, you can go ahead. The fiscal year 27 budget has not been passed yet, and so the full financial projection updates are not yet complete. So I'm going to show you some slides that pivot off of last year's projections that go through fiscal year 2031. We are in the process of updating these so that we will have FY27 through 2032. So that's in process next. And importantly, though, what we can go ahead and tell you is that the big picture from what I'm about to show you is basically the same. And for any of you who've participated in any of the GRTC board meetings last year where we discussed this, this will be similar information. For some of you, this may be new information. Go ahead, Michelle. Yeah, so the big picture is largely the same, and then I have a little bit of high-level updates about some differences we expect in the updated fiscal year 27 projections. So important sort of big picture background of understanding these financial projections is on the cost side, GRTC is projecting service levels to be roughly the same, going up a little bit at the end of this future period in 2031 or 2032 with the expansion of the 2 BRT corridors. But beyond that, it's not significantly expecting big increases in service in these initial projections. About a 6% increase in total service hours based on the projections we're looking at. The main driver of cost is the general inflation of wages, insurance, fuel, and so on. And in the current year, in FY26, FY27, the total operating budget is around $100 million. In terms of revenues, the revenue buckets that fund service come primarily from the federal, the 5307 funding, which can be used for operating, but also for capital, 5339, which is primarily for capital, and then some other discretionary federal programs. For example, GRTC has used CMAQ grants in the past for operating subservice. There's the state buckets, primarily the merit operating funding, but also particularly the discretionary programs, demo and trip grants, which have supported service and currently support some service expansions GRTC is running. There's the large regional bucket of funding, which is the 15% of CVTA revenues that go to GRTC. And then there's the local funding. There's the minimum contributions from the 3 central jurisdictions that are required under the CVTA legislation. And then there is some discretionary pay for service funding, a little bit right now from Petersburg that comes into the budget. Next slide. For some perspective of how much comes from each of these buckets in fiscal year 26, about 19%, about $18 million. Again, with about $100 million, these percentages are very close to the dollar amounts in millions. 19% from federal, about 27% of state. Important to note, though, that about 7% of that, so 7% of the total budget, is in short-term grants, grants that will expire. Then the regional funding is about 30% of revenues in FY26, and again in FY27, about 30 to 32% we expect. Importantly, right now, GRTC has only been using the direct outlay that it gets each year because of the federal COVID money that GRTC and most agencies received in past years and has mostly used up. GRTC was able to effectively bank a lot of CVTA funding, and so is sitting on a substantial reserve of CVTA funding, which I'll come back to in a minute. And then local funding is about 17% of revenues. Next slide. Importantly, the federal, state, regional funding, the reliable, consistent things that are effectively formula ongoing funds are about 84% of revenues in FY26. In directly generated revenues, that's advertising, some operating revenues, some interest earned from reserves and so on, is only about 2%. The remaining funds that GRTC has been relying on last year and this year, which adds up to almost 15% of the budget, is time-limited grants. About 10% of operating funds are from some form of a time-limited federal or state grant, primarily. And then prior year reserves. It was 4% of the budget in FY26. It looks to be about 2% of the budget in FY27. Other limited time or one-time funds that GRTC can rely on are some of those CVTA reserves. As I said, having the federal COVID money and using that in the past has allowed GRTC to bank a lot of CVTA funds, cumulative reserve of over $60 million at this point. But of course, that reserve is a reserve that you can spend down, but once it's spent down, you do not have that money again in the future. So forecasting out revenues, if we look at the next slide, the forecast of revenues based on the FY26 to FY31 estimates, the federal portion of revenues actually declines. The amount that can be spent on preventative maintenance flex options in the future actually declines. There's a significant challenge in, for example, certifying some parts as Buy America, which would allow them to be eligible for federal funding. So that portion actually declines over time. Also, there's a greater need in the future to use more 5307 money for capital, which limits how much you can spend from the federal onto operating. State funding in aggregate declines over time as some of these short-term grants expire. So there are short-term grants that have been funding the extensions and improvements on routes 1, on 1A, on 7A and B. Those are all short-term grants that are expiring soon or in the next few years. There is a significant increase in the regional portion, which is the large gray portion in the middle, which is using up CVTA reserve funds in future years in order to potentially avoid service cuts. Next slide. There's some local decline in revenues in the future because a portion of what's counted as local funding is the Chesterfield funds that are a pass-through of the grant for the extension of the 1A. So that's a part of why some of the local funding actually declines in the next few years. The self-funded portion is relatively minimal and self-limiting. There are prior year reserves GRTC can use from its prior year operating reserves. But again, as those dollars are used, you have less interest, and those dollars are no longer usable in the future once they've been exhausted or spent. Really critical point, of course, is in these projections, we were looking at 2030 as basically the year at which those reserves become exhausted, and 2031 becomes the year at which you have to deal with a significant gap in the fiscal picture. Just really quickly, next slide. This is the detail, as we shared last year to the board, of those projections, all of those dollars across all of the individual categories over time. I'll just highlight again that top category, federal, going down somewhat as there's less that you can spend towards PM Flex, and also more of the dollars needing to go into the capital budget. You'll see the projections of some of the larger elements like the state DRPT formula funds, we assume basically grow at the rate of inflation. You see the CVTA direct funds to operation grow significantly, in part by spending down the reserves over time and then falling back to effectively what is the annual outlay of CVTA funds each year in 2031, which by that point is projected to be about 39 million. So this is the more detailed look. Again, we're updating these numbers in order to get FY27 through FY32. On the cost side, these projections from last year showed, next slide, about a 5.4% annual cost growth based on the unit of service, meaning for each primarily hour of service, a bus or microtransit vehicles running on the street, each year that cost has been projected to go up about 5.4%. The only significant new services in these projections are the North-South BRT and the Western BRT extension and the associated local route changes that come with it. And it assumes that the capital contributions for BRT are primarily coming from discretionary programs, not using any of the programs like 5307 money that would be more flexible for using for operations. In 2031, the baseline operating cost to continue the service GRTC is running today plus the BRT would be about $131.7 million based on these projections. And so you compare that cost to the projected revenue in 2031, and that's where you have the gap. Next slide. So starting in 2030, but definitely by 2031, in these projections, we're estimating at this, based on these numbers at that and last year's projections, about a $40 million or 30% gap in 2031. Again, that gap appears because spending down all of the reserves in prior years leaves this gap come the future out year when the reserves have been expended. Now, we are updating these projections. Next slide. The significant updates we are seeing in these projections are that, number one, the BRT projects, because of the timing, they're expected to move from being implemented in FY31 to FY32. That delays some cost increases. We are also seeing that updated projections of cost increases are showing that there's less substantial increases in cost, only about a 3 to 4% increase per year in the next 4 to 5 years in that cost per unit of service going up each year. Nevertheless, that gap still appears in the future by 2032, we expect. So that initial projection based on our initial looks internally shows the fiscal gap appearing in FY32 instead of FY31. And of course, one of the major downsides of following that projection would be basically all of CVTA and GRTC's operating reserves would be exhausted by that year, which is not a fiscally wise thing to necessarily do. Keep going, Michelle. So the outcome of this assessment is, and again, we'll have more updated financials in the next few weeks that we can share in more detail. If there's no significant new revenues of some kind, GRTC would need to reduce service by about 20% by 2031 in order to be, financially and fiscally stable beyond that year. And therefore, when we sit down in June, we are going to design 3 scenarios, 2 of which are going to be pivoting off of this baseline financial scenario. And the two of those scenarios built on those 2 concepts built on this baseline service scenario are going to need to have about 20% less service than GRTC runs today. Next slide. So those scenarios, when we sit down in June, we're going to have 2 service concepts built at a level of about 20% less service based on these financial projections. We're going to have a ridership concept that emphasizes keeping frequent service in the busiest places in the region. And then we're going to have a coverage concept that emphasizes maintaining service everywhere that it is today. That's the priority of what we plan to draw to help people see what does it look like to focus on different priorities at the same funding level if we have no additional revenue. We're going to develop a third concept that would be built under some form of an expanded financial scenario that would assume some additional revenue source. We would expect at this point in time that scenario is likely to represent about 20% more service to today. So you can think about these scenarios. This third scenario is going to be substantially different in terms of effectively having almost 40% more service than the 2 constrained baseline scenarios. Ultimately, that may go higher depending on the priorities and preferences of everyone at the table of what we draw, but we want to, have a general outline at the start of kind of the goal of what kind of level of additional service we might be drawn to. And that's what we think 20% is about the right number. So that is the summary of the financial situation and financial projections. And I think we're happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Scudder. A lot of good information there. I did see a chat message that we'd like to get a copy of the slide deck that you presented today to the TAC. Ashley Austin was requesting that. It's very interesting to see some of the graphics that you provided, Michelle, on ridership and times, and interesting that we can get that from cell phone data. So we're using technology in a good way, I think. So, all right. If there are any questions from the members regarding this presentation or any discussion about the information presented, any questions to our presenters?
Let's have some questions.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Yeah, it's Sherry, it's Amy. I have some questions.
Yes,
I
Amy, go ahead.
don't think you can see. Okay, Michelle and Scudder. Michelle, great presentation. And I do have a question about the employment. So it looks like you're based on current access to jobs or current trips and employment, but I didn't see a whole lot about future. So are you going to be looking at the future plan? Because in New Kent, right, we have thousands of jobs. We have 500 jobs right now at AutoZone. We have 1,000 jobs coming that's being built right now in distribution. We have literally thousands of jobs coming by probably starting to come online late 2027, 2028 timeframe. So I just wondered if that is something that you'll be looking at in terms of, people needing access to those jobs. I'm not sure that GRTC can solve that problem, but I would be interested to know if you'll have that information.
Yeah,
Yes.
Michelle, you want to go ahead?
And there's two ways. I guess one answer is no, only in that the distant future, no one knows what's going to happen, right? We can forecast it, which can be a very good guess, but then there's uncertainty. But what you're describing, Amy, is not the distant future, it's the imminent future. You know what's coming. And so there's two sources of information we have that we can use for that kind of planning. One is Plan RVA's forecast, and I have other maps that I didn't show that show where we expect the density of jobs to change between now and 2050, and that's coming from the forecasting work that Plan RVA has done. But of course, that can be very far in the future, and it can be both uncertain and a little too far in the future for this plan. So the other source of information is what you just described, Amy, which is that working with each of you, and as each of you come join us in a couple of weeks, you're bringing in that knowledge about where in your county or your community that development is coming online in the next couple of years, or maybe 10 years from now, so that if it's not in the forecast, because forecasts are never perfect, we still have that information feeding into the plan. So those are our two main sources of that kind of knowledge.
Good. So, and I have some more questions. So another observation, we just started our microtransit in April, and we've had almost 100 trips just in April. So I just want to note that just because it's a rural area doesn't mean that microtransit can't work. It just is how it's designed and implemented. So let's just note that, please, on the slides. It looks like you're saying because it's rural that there's low ridership for the microtransit, but that's not the case in our area. So I just don't want there to be any misunderstanding that rural transit cannot, or rural areas cannot have a successful microtransit. The other thing, I guess, is for Scudder and probably GRTC, but the financials are stark, right? And I guess, and you just had the one slide up with the historic revenue from localities, or the local share. And it looks like it's by half, right? And I understand that's because CVTA came on, and now everyone's been relying on CVTA. But I know there was a baseline that localities had to maintain, right, a certain level of funding assistance, but that there's no reason why it shouldn't be growing, right? And so I guess it's half, right? It's $10 million I saw for the city. When I was there, it was $20 million, right? So it's half. And I just don't think that it's reasonable to think that, number one, CBTA is going to come up with more money, because I don't think that's the case. In fact, it may go down a little bit for various reasons. And then the other is there are no other reasonable funding sources, right? So I think there needs to be hard conversation with the localities on their contribution to transit. And, I'm just really taken back by that. So I'm sure that's going to be a real discussion. But Scudder, you kept saying new revenue, new revenue. I don't know about new revenue. May need to be increased revenue from the local share, right? So
it could be from a range of sources, new, different, or new as in added from existing.
Right.
I think the conversation there is wide open. And you're right about the change in local contributions, the CVTA legislation that created the regional funding source. The maintenance of effort requirement was 50% of the fiscal year 2019 funding level to GRTC. And the growth of that funding was pegged to an inflationary measure. The downside, of course, being that general inflation tends to be a little lower than cost inflation for transit, especially recently, because wage growth has been so high.
Right.
So that's been, the challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty stark and very, very concerning for our region. If localities can't step up, and I'm not saying they won't, but I just think that's going to have to be a very serious conversation. Thank you. Good job.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. I see Andrea Torres.
Yeah, I just want to add some additional, I guess, context to the questions that Amy had. The inputs, yes, Amy, part of the scope, as Michelle already highlighted, was to understand what the future projections are, what's already planned for the jurisdictions. So she already mentioned how that will come to the table, but really wanted to plan RVA resources. This ends up being a regional effort for all of the jurisdictions. Additionally, the zone microtransit, they are looking at both the rural study done by Plan RVA, definitely an input into this, but also what are the jurisdictions doing today. And I will want to say that the Powhatan zone being an example of our pilot for the most rural, I mean, even for the last quarter, this third quarter, we had about 600 boardings. So that's about, above 200 per month that you're getting right there. So the zone, we know that your comparison, Powhatan is still doing well in comparison with that. And we just are looking at the right model for a zone like that for microtransit. So microtransit is definitely a mode that we're looking at as an option for some of the rurals. I think that's kind of the only, with the cost. A output or end of this will also be, we want to have a regional kind of concept that we've come together that does show the needs of today, but also the needs of the future. And we understand that there is a dollar figure to that. And we want to be able to then take that to those who understand that this was a regional effort that everyone put in, and that we have to look at revenue sources that either need to be added today or don't exist today, or conversations that we have not had or need to have, but having the input and understanding that transit is important to this region for several reasons, and having the example to go with it that we've all put together is kind of the intent behind it.
Okay. I just might note, Adrian, that you're talking about Powhatan, you're serving the entire county now, which is now borderline rural service. We're serving a 22-mile area, which is truly microtransit. So I'm very pleased to hear that the ridership has gone up in Powhatan. That's great. But again, that's no longer microtransit. You're serving the entire county with one, as I understand it, with one supposedly microtransit vehicle, if I'm not mistaken. That's different.
Appreciate it. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. Thank you for your input, Amy. Any other discussion?
This is
Ashley.
Yep, this is Ashley Austin with Henrico. I have a question. So my understanding is the approach to this plan and the way the workshops are going to happen, we're going to be looking at, you know, I think I saw a 20% service cut. What's the feedback that GRTC has gotten from the GRTC board on that approach? Do they know we're going to be looking at a 20% service cut? I just want to make sure when I'm coming into these workshops as the transit lead for the county that I'm, you know, following, you know, what's expected. So what is the board weighed in on, GRTC's board specifically, for that approach?
Adrian, you probably had the most.
Yeah, so we've
recent
updated
conversations with
the
board members.
development committee, Ashley, on that. So it's 4 or 5 board members. We've told them there'll be 3 concepts, understanding that the revenue inputs are only sustainable for so long. So, I mean, there wasn't, I guess, a lot of conversation specifically as far as them giving us feedback, but we did tell them like the intent is to have the 3 different alternatives.
Okay, so they're aware that we're going to be looking at service cuts, but then also, of course, we're going to be looking at a 20% growth model as well, which is good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, with this service, I mean, so it is going to be kind of like a step back. This is our region. Amy was in it. Some of you guys were in it the first time around that we did this. I mean, that we're just different than we were before. And so a big piece of this will also be like, what is the current shift in terms of like the population and density and businesses and jobs, but also like the north-south will be here in the future, as well as the western extension. So service as it exists today and the connections that need to be made need to be looked at. So some of that will also be like some of the fixed route itself will be shifted back to serve different populations than it did, and also be more connections. So with that said, the first time we did this, we did cost neutral effort with like a redesign. Not that we're doing a redesign, but we are looking at things that may have changed. And we did end up pulling off some like redundant service. So I think there's also the opportunity to look at just what is the right service, and even though it might end up being a little bit of a reduction at the same time. Does that help a little bit?
I think so. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that there was, you know, communication with leadership too, that we were going to be taking this approach. It sounds like there is, or there has been, so that's good. I also wanted to quickly chime in and say that I liked the 5-year outlook, the table format, which is why I wanted to get a copy of the slides, just so I can take a deeper dive into that. So thank you for the presentation.
Yes, Amy.
I'm sorry, I have one more question because Adrian made a really good point in that in this scenario, we are going to be, well, you're saying now that the BRTs are going to come in on 2032 timeframe. Is that right? So a redesign, pardon?
The north-south, not the western.
The western
will be sooner.
Sooner. Okay, so are we looking at a mini redesign of the local service to feed into that, just like we did with the Pulse? Because that's the reason the Pulse is successful, is because we took that very bold step of making a complete change in the system to support the Pulse all in one. I know everybody said that was the craziest thing in the world to do, but we did it, and it was the right thing to do. It was hard, right? It was hard for GRTC. It was hard for everybody. But it got done, and now the results are it's the best performing BRT, I believe, in the country. Certainly, it has rebounded in ridership better than any other system that I'm aware of. But from a BRT perspective, so are you going to be looking at that, Scudder and Michelle?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The idea of the concepts will be, what should GRTC be running in by fiscal year 32 when both of those BRTs are open? What should the network look like in these 3 different conceptual scenarios? And including what local stuff should change once those BRTs are there.
Okay.
So yeah, that's absolutely part of the conversation.
Okay, excellent.
And
Thank you.
Amy, we did the north-south TOD study that's kind of closing up, and it identified those nodes. So there's 6 of them. And so it's also about what kind of service would be a feeder to those stations as nodes with kind of a little bit of a redesign.
Oh, yeah, that should be, yeah. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
All right, very good conversation. We can certainly learn from examples of the past and use that under our review going forward. Any other comments or questions? If not, we'll move on to our transportation agency updates and Mr. Wood Hudson with DRPT, if you're ready to give an update. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 quick updates for everybody. First up is back in April, we launched the 5th Virginia Breeze route, the Tidewater Current. This is our newest route serving the I-64 corridor with stops here in Richmond, at Main Street Station, the airport, and in New Kent County. We are that service is available for booking. We are doing some minor, adjustments here and there, but it seems to be being very well received. So, if you have questions about that service, if you all are looking for marketing materials or anything to share on social media, please reach out and we're happy to provide some information. The second item I wanted to mention is our rail team is working diligently on the state rail plan, and they have a virtual public meeting coming up on June 1st. I'll drop a link to the registration in the chat for those people that would be interested in participating in that event. That's what I have today. Thank you guys very much. Very interesting and in-depth discussion on GRTC's efforts. So thanks to GRTC and the consultants for bringing that to us today.
Yes, thank you, Wood. And so moving on, do we have Miss Corey Robinson with GRTC to give any update?
I do. I have just a short update for everyone. So first of all, GRTC employees were recently recognized at the Community Transportation Association of Virginia Spring Conference for their strong performance at the Virginia Bus and Maintenance Rodeo. Congratulations to Hugh Lewis, who earned Rookie of the Year there, and to Rondell Daly, who delivered the best performance in the passenger stop obstacle. Their recognition reflects the professionalism, skill, and dedication of GRTC employees system-wide. And meanwhile, a reminder, Tap into Transit Day returns July 14th as a community fundraiser celebrating the impact of open access transit across the Richmond region. The event will bring together riders, community partners, regional leaders, artists, and advocates for an evening focused on how public transportation connects people to opportunity while supporting the future of open access through the Transit Access Partnership, or TAP. This year's event will feature special collaborative art projects with local artists and the All City Art Club. And that wraps up my brief little update, and I will take any questions if anyone has anyone.
Thank you, Corey.
Thanks.
So John O'Keefe, do we get an update from you with all the great work you do over at Ride Finders?
Sure. Mr. O'Keefe let me know that he was going to miss the meeting, so he emailed me an update. So I'll go ahead and email that out after the TAC meeting. I'll also include a physical copy of the VDOT agency update, and I can also send out the GRTC slides, Michelle and Scudder. If you send them to my email, I'm happy to attach everything all together.
Wonderful. Thanks for doing that, Sarah Keel. Appreciate it. And we'll get an update from Naomi Sidmock from VDOT.
Yes, thank you. Just a few items I wanted to share. So the Commonwealth Transportation Board did meet in April. They talked about a few key items of interest for you all. They did talk about revenue sharing. They did work to fund at 100% of the request priority 1 projects, the projects that had previously received revenue sharing funding. And then priority 2 projects, some were funded at 100%. Those are projects that are either VTrans needs or are in a locality's capital improvement plan. Some were funded at 100%, some were funded around 84%. I can drop in the chat. So there was a 6-year improvement plan meeting yesterday. And if you haven't seen the project list for Richmond District projects that are being proposed to be added to the 6-year improvement plan, I'll drop that in the chat for you all to see. And I'll do that real quick. We go. I also have a few more things to share. The action meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, they did make some changes to Smart Scale. They did add innovative intersections, so not just innovative interchanges, but intersections as well as potentially eligible projects for HPP funds, those high priority projects, statewide funding pot. So if you haven't seen it, the Smart Scale technical guide has been revised as well to reflect that change that was made. Let's see. Yep, Smart Scale. The district itself has finished our pre-screening, so we've reviewed the applications that have been submitted. We're working the best we can to keep as many as we can to move forward to full application. It's going to be a lot of work. We're aware of it. We're going to have to look at a lot of signal justification reports, OSARs, IARs, all acronym soup, all of that. But we will work hard to get all of that done so we can move as many projects forward in Smart Scale as we can. In the VDOT report, we also have the usual updates related to some of the big projects going on, like the Fall Line Trail and the I-64 gap. I don't see any major changes in those updates that we usually give. So if you want to take a look at those when you have a chance, that'll be available. And then, yeah, the SYIP public hearing, the 6-year improvement plan public hearing yesterday. Short and sweet. We had a few public comments. I think the biggest thing was a push from the speakers to try and get Safe Routes to Schools funded. So that was one of the projects that wasn't being proposed to be in the 6-year improvement program. So that is where we heard the most public comment to add that funding back to Richmond Public Schools for Safe Routes to Schools. Let me know if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thanks.
Yeah, a lot of need for safe routes to schools. As we have more people in the pedestrian traffic area getting into those schools. Yep, so we'll take a look at the Plan RVA newsletter. That's always available for your information. Any comments from the individual TAC members? Oh, and thank you, Wood and Naomi, for sharing your links in the chats. That's very helpful. Any comments, additional comments, Amy?
Sure, I just wanted to mention that Naomi reminded me about the Fall Line Trail. It is amazing. If you all have not been out there and been able to ride on it, please do. I have ridden on it several times. I'm going to ride on it again tonight if anybody wants to join me from Carter Park around 6 o'clock. And we're going to take a nice trip down, and I ride with Rrtpo on it on Thursday nights. If anybody wants to join us on that evening trip, we leave from Crump Park at 6 o'clock. We roll and we go up the Fall Line Trail. We make a loop around Ashland, and then we come back down on the Fall Line Trail back to Crump, and then we go and have fun at Franco's for dinner. So if anybody wants to join on the Fall Line Trail, please take advantage of it because it is absolutely amazing. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Amy. Did anyone get an update from Ashland on their little event that they had this past weekend? Not sure either. Okay. All right then. If there's no other reports from the members, we will go ahead and note that our next meeting will be Tuesday, June the 9th at 9 a.m. And with that, we had great discussions today, and I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.